Think about someone you used to know. Not someone who failed, not someone who burned out in the way that makes a good story. Someone who was quietly, unmistakably different. They saw things early. They asked questions that made rooms uncomfortable. They understood systems before anyone else had even noticed there was a system. And then, somewhere, they went quiet. No dramatic exit, no public breakdown. They just receded. Most people assume something went wrong. I want to offer you a different explanation. Something went right, and the system couldn't allow it. Here is a pattern that almost nobody names directly. Take someone with genuine depth, not just intelligence in the narrow sense. Someone who thinks in systems, who sees 3 moves ahead, who holds contradiction without needing to resolve it prematurely. In their 20s, driven, visible, trying. Then somewhere in their 30s, something shifts. The ambition doesn't disappear. It turns inward. The energy that used to go into building a career, maintaining a network, staying legible to the people in charge, it goes somewhere else, into a project, into silence, into something nobody else quite understands yet. The people around them call it withdrawal, burnout, giving up. But that diagnosis misses something fundamental. It assumes the system they left was worth staying in. It never asks whether the system failed them first. This is not new. Isaac Newton did the work that became his theory of gravitation, not inside a prestigious institution, but alone at his family farm during 2 years of plague-driven isolation. He later called it his miraculous year. The world got calculus out of that solitude. Henry David Thoreau walked away from society in 1845, spent 2 years at Walden Pond. People thought he had lost his mind. He was 27. What he wrote there shaped American philosophy for 2 centuries. Carl Jung, one of the most important minds in the history of psychology, built a stone tower with his own hands in a Swiss village. No telephone, no electricity, writing by candlelight. His colleagues thought he was having a breakdown. What he produced in that tower, the concepts of individuation, the shadow, the archetype, are now foundational to how we understand the human mind. The pattern is consistent: withdrawal, silence, then, eventually, something that lasts. But here is the question nobody asks. Why did they have to leave? What was it about the rooms they were in that made solitude the only viable option? Jung had a framework for this. He called it individuation. The idea is this: most people spend their lives running pre-installed software. They want what they're told to want. They fear what they're told to fear. They measure success by metrics handed to them, by their parents, their culture, their employer, their feed. And they do all of this while genuinely believing they are making independent choices. Jung called this identification with the collective. You are so merged with the shared script that you mistake it for your own voice. Individuation is the process of stepping out of that, the gradual, sometimes painful work of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were designed to be. But here is what Jung was unusually honest about. Society does not like individuation. Society needs predictability. It needs people to follow the script. And when someone starts to deviate, the collective pushes back. Not always overtly. Often it is quiet, surgical, and almost impossible to name in the moment it is happening. There is something that rarely gets named directly. I'm going to call it translation exhaustion. Here is what it looks like. When your mind naturally builds models, when you see second and third order consequences before anyone else sees the first, when you are comfortable holding complexity without needing to resolve it, you think at a level that most conversations simply do not operate at. So every interaction requires translation. You compress multi-layered thought into something digestible. You strip away qualifications because people find them tedious. You lose the nuance because nuance reads as evasiveness. You say, "It's complicated," and watch eyes glaze over. You say something simple and feel a small internal betrayal. And you do this dozens of times a day, every meeting, every dinner, every casual conversation. What people don't understand is that this translation work is not just socially exhausting, it is cognitively damaging. The habit of simplifying starts to bleed into your private thinking. The constant performance of being easier than you are starts to hollow you out. Jung wrote about the persona, the mask we wear for society. For most people, the gap between the mask and the true self is manageable. The mask fits reasonably well. But for someone whose natural way of engaging with the world is deeply out of step with what most social environments reward, the mask becomes suffocating. Think about what this looks like in a real workplace. You are in a meeting. Someone presents a strategy with 3 obvious flaws. You see them immediately, not because you are arrogant, but because that is simply how your mind works. But the last time you raised concerns this early, you were quietly labeled negative, not a team player, someone who complicates things. So you stay quiet. You watch the plan get approved. You watch it fail 6 months later, exactly the way you predicted, and a small part of you dies. This happens again and again. Here is a hard truth. What gets rewarded is not depth. It is legibility. It is relatability. The ability to make complex things seem simple, which is a very different skill from actually understanding complex things. The person who questions the framework, who says, "I think we are solving the wrong problem entirely," is not rewarded. They are a threat to stability, to hierarchy, to the comfortable belief that the people in charge know what they are doing. There is another reason this happens, and it is uncomfortable to admit. Depth makes people feel exposed. Not deliberately, not as an act of aggression, just by existing at a natural level. When you meet someone who thinks more clearly than you, who asks questions you hadn't thought to ask, who sees implications you missed, something different happens. Because your thinking is deeply tied to your sense of self. If someone challenges the quality of your thinking, even implicitly, even without a single word, they are touching something close to your identity. So people defend against it, and the defense rarely looks like defense. It looks like dismissal. Too theoretical, not practical, difficult to work with. Jung called this shadow projection. When someone's presence highlights your own limitations, the mind doesn't always say, "I should think harder." Sometimes it says, "There is something wrong with them." This is why Socrates was executed, not because his ideas were dangerous in the way a weapon is dangerous, but because his questions made people feel stupid, and that was intolerable. In modern life, the persecution is more mundane, but no less real. And so, quietly, they stop, not because they fail, because the cost of participation finally exceeded the return. Here is what the history actually shows. Emily Dickinson wrote nearly 1,800 poems in her bedroom. She barely left her house. She published almost nothing in her lifetime. Today, she is considered one of the greatest poets in the English language. Grigory Perelman solved one of the most difficult problems in mathematics. He was offered the highest honor in his field and $1 million prize. He declined both, walked away from academia entirely. People said he had cracked. People said he was unstable. But here is another reading. Maybe he understood exactly what accepting would mean, that he would become a performer, that his identity would be handed back to him as a product, that the system, which had ignored him for years, would now claim him as proof of its own legitimacy. He chose to remain himself, at significant personal cost, and that is not madness. That is a coherent set of values. The withdrawal that looks like failure from the outside is often from the inside, the beginning of the most important work a person will ever do. You have been watching this for nearly 20 minutes. Let me ask you something. Are you feeling recognition, not of someone else, of yourself? Maybe you've been feeling a pull lately, a slow withdrawal from conversations that used to matter, a growing preference for your own company, not out of depression, but out of something that honestly feels more like relief. You have gotten quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because explaining feels like more effort than it is worth. You feel most alive when you are deep in something, a problem, a project, a question with no quick answer. Least alive in rooms full of noise that means nothing. If any of that resonates, Jung's framework suggests this is not pathology. It might be direction. The pull toward solitude, when it comes from intellectual vitality and not despair, is often the psyche's way of saying, you need more room. You are operating at a fraction of your actual depth, and something inside you is demanding more. In every era, the people whose ideas end up shaping the world are almost never the ones who were most visible during their lifetimes. They are the ones who were willing to be invisible long enough to do the real work. Newton at that farm, Thoreau at the pond, Jung at his tower. The world did not lose them when they went quiet. The world found them, years, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries later, when the work they did in solitude finally reached people who were ready to receive it. So if you feel the pull toward a quieter life, a deeper life, a life with more room in it, you are not disappearing. You are simply finally beginning to show up for the work that actually matters, on the timeline that work requires, in the space that kind of depth genuinely needs. The question is not whether to withdraw. The question is whether you are doing it with intention or just drifting, whether you are building something in the quiet or just hiding from the loud. Build the tower. Do the work. And before you go, I want to ask you something. Think about that person, the one who came to mind at the beginning of this, the one who went quiet. Were they withdrawing, or were they finally starting? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.